Hey everybody, welcome to USA Wrestling's Moments Off the Mat. My name is Mike Clayton, your Coach Education Manager, and we're joined today with US Wrestling Officials Association Rep Zach Arrett, and then from our US National Coaches Council, Zach Dominguez, Danny Struck, US Women's National Team Coach Jess Medina, Jackie Davis from Beat the Streets in Boston, and Takara Montgomery,
Olympian and two-time world medalist.
How are you guys doing today?
Pretty good.
Excellent.
Great. All right, Zach, if you're ready, let's go ahead and get started with this week's game.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and flip over the screens here. This actually has scoring points, so you're going to get points for scoring it correctly, and then you also get more points if you score it faster than your opponents. The main topic for today, what we're going to be taking a look at, is really out of bounds situations. And so there's going to be some different options on some of these, as whether is it 2 points or is it 1 point? Is it 2 points for a takedown? Is it 1 point just for a step out? Is it 1 point for a step out, or is it no points because they were in parterre? Or is it fleeing the mat? Is it a direct push out? Or is it just a step out? And I will tell you that for the most part, these are this area is one of the more difficult areas to call as well as a referee. First question. So out of bounds, 1 point or no points? So I'll play it again one more time here. From the trials from a couple of years ago from Final X. So we'll watch this again because actually I got this one wrong. So I was the referee in this match, and after I scored it, I realized I shouldn't have scored this.
Damn it. That's what I was going to pick too.
I'm just following you.
Hey, the one thing I think that's important, at least, and I'll use it from my standpoint here, is like I don't get them all right either. As much as I want to be right, like I'm not going to be right all the time. And this is a great example of where the referee team actually did a great job, because I scored 1 point for blue, but after I scored, I was like, you know what? I don't think that should have been any points in this process. And I guess here's a little bit, I'll kind of give my interpretation. When I was watching this, I scored 1 blue, I think, because they were here, they were standing in this process. And as they go down, so now we're down on our knees. And blue hips him out from that position. So when I thought about that, even after I scored the 1 point for blue, I thought, you know what, these guys were in parterre. And I shouldn't have scored any points. And another way to look at this too, at least from my point when I was looking at this after watching the video, like who was kind of the attacking wrestler in this position? Like who was working and I guess
Red was, yeah.
Yeah. So Red was working the action. He gets to a body lock here in the process too. And so he goes here, and so he's the one, in my opinion, that's looking to score here, whereas blue is not. And so in this case, they go down. Had blue gone out of bounds here, I probably would have scored 1 red because red was attacking. But because they went down to parterre and then blue then wizarded them out of bounds, like the best option should have been no points. And that's actually what the referee team confirmed. I was just wrong in this process. So
my question was, and I got it wrong, but at first I thought he was just trying to straight push him out. Not wrestle him out or anything. Was that ever a thought or consideration? Or
I think when you look at like a straight push out, like I think he was definitely pushing him to the edge. But like when I look at this, like to me, that's hard to be just a straight push out when I'm reaching and I'm wrapping and locking around your body and getting here. As I start taking you, like if you push back, I might be able to throw you, rotate you down, possibly slide by, something along those lines. So it's not just a direct shove out. Like when you see a direct push out, a lot of times it's somehow your hands and you're going to kind of give a shove as you go, whether it's in a front headlock or something like that as well. You're giving a shove to take him out of bounds, where here he's actually like working towards, and he gets to this lock. And when he gets to this lock, it's going to be difficult for me to call that up. Because sometimes I've seen people where they're attacking him and they get to the edge and they literally stop and then they just they shove out of bounds. They've been doing all the work, but instead of just following them out of bounds, they stop at the line and then shove out. And then sometimes that situation gets called as a push out, because as a referee, you see those arms extend in the process. And as it does, then you're like, all right, that's a push out. when even though you attacked him all the way to the edge, it stops. So the one thing I would recommend in that process is, if you're coaching your athlete, is to tell them to continue to attack going out of bounds. Like, don't stop on the edge if you feel like they're going out of bounds. Continue to gut wrestle through that, because sometimes you can score. I've seen a lot of places where they stop wrestling on the edge and it goes from what would have been 1 point to 2 points, or what it would have been 2 points to 4 points. So I would just wrestle through and shoot through the line, through the edge to in your process. Don't stop on the edge to shove.
Initially, you were looking at the fact that Gilman's head touched out of bounds. Is that what you were looking at?
So yeah, so I'll try to stop it here. So like his hand goes there, but that's really not quite out of bounds yet, because typically when we look at it, like one hand isn't out. Now there's a little subject, if your whole chest is out, that's a little more complicated than that. But right now he's not out of bounds, but he now would be out of bounds with that head touching out of bounds. But because they were already in parterre, this is when I stopped it, and this is when I scored the one blue. Had that happened initially, like had they came up and he wizarded him from standing and wizarded him down, that would have been 1 point. But because as they continued here, like they stopped right here, and now it's another action down. So now we're in parterre. So I shouldn't have scored at 1 point. So I scored that incorrectly on the mat. So great questions. Anybody else? Let's try another one. Zach, you're at the top of the leaderboard, bud.
Yeah, with 0. Got it.
There we go. Greco, 1 point or no points. So here's your choices. Only 2 choices here.
So I'm going to go, my point of view on this one's going to be definitely from the coaching side. That's how I answered it, because I would be furious if we didn't get a point, but I feel like I'm going to be wrong again.
Yeah.
So my question is, a lot of times guys get to the edge here, they just throw to throw, and in the little younger ranks, the lower ranks, a lot of times that gets rewarded. The bailer gets rewarded, and I struggle with that as a coach, because you always want your guys attacking, but that always seems, whoever goes last seems to get the benefit of the doubt, not the person that started the action.
If you're looking for an area that probably gets overturned from challenges more than anything else, it's probably that area, at least from a national level. Is it a slip, or is it an actual action, or legitimate action that involves risk? And I think that part is certainly the part we work on with referees, is getting to the part of, why did he have to make an attempt? Because Red was attacking him, Red was getting to the body, and he had to make an action. Now, if he completes it, he's going to get 4 points out of it. In this particular case, this is interesting, because he goes to make the action, and then Red just kind of like shrugs him and shoves him off in this process. So it's like, all right, what do you score in this? Is it 1 point for Red because Blue went out of bounds? Is it a slip? Can you slip out of bounds? In that process, if Red covers him, like, here's a great coaching point. If Red covers him, Red probably gets 2 points out of this. But because Red stood standing and is okay taking that, just stopped wrestling there, he probably could have got himself another point. But you are right, Zach, in terms of, this is one that's difficult to call consistently, because you're trying to look at it from different angles. I think the part we look at least I try to look at from, is if it's a legitimate attempt, I feel like Red has to move somewhere. Like, Red doesn't move. Like, we looked at that match last week with Cologne, when he went to the body lock and the guy went to make that throw. And when he made that throw, he went directly to his back, and Joe was right on top of him. Like, he didn't move one way or the other. So how legitimate an attempt was that if you couldn't move his hips one side or the other? So certainly a valid point.
You mentioned earlier the concept of slipping on the edge. Is that a written rule anywhere, that slips exist on the edge?
There are no slips out of bounds.
Okay.
So you can make you can have a legitimate attempt going out of bounds, but if it's, somebody's getting a point because you were standing and you went out of bounds, so it's going to be a point for somebody. Zach, you're still on first. Answered it just slightly faster than the others. So, all right.
Take that to Kara.
All right, here's the next one. So this is going to be 2 point, 1 point, or no points. So this could be a takedown. It could just be a step out, or it could be no points in this process. And you get an actual in slow motion here for you too. Oh, pretty good. I thought we'd actually see it one more time in full speed, because full speed's a little different than slow motion in this, and I'll try to watch it just in this. Who scored 2 red? I don't know who scored yet.
I did.
I did.
Those whoever scored 2 red, who would like to walk me through why you scored 2?
I will. Sorry, the reason why I scored 2 red is she's attacking. Blue's going out of bounds. If Blue doesn't post her hand, she's going to go to her back, right? If she doesn't stop herself from giving up an exposure, she's giving up the takedown. So I watched a couple matches yesterday where the overturn was the post created a takedown because she's preventing the exposure as opposed to that. So they went with, that's what I saw at least. That was the benefit of the doubt I'm giving red for attacking and taking her back.
Okay. Anybody else that scored 2 red?
Yeah, I had the same thoughts. It started on the feet, and once she posted to me, that was a takedown.
Those of you that scored 1 point, I think was the other one that a couple of you scored 1 point, I think. What was the?
I scored 1 point because I thought that even with the post, she didn't break the 90 and she was still in a crackback position or like a crackdown position. And that red didn't collect the hips. So I considered it like a grounded, not takedown position going out of bounds.
Okay.
Folk styler.
I think that when you look at this, I think this is the one part that's probably the most difficult part of this process is the out of bounds is, in the center of the mat, you probably wouldn't have scored anything at this point. You would have just been waiting for red to finish the action in this process. Unfortunately, because of the out of bounds, it puts it in a situation. And I know I've talked to a few people who are like, well, if it's not a takedown inbounds, it's not a takedown out of bounds. But I've also been around long enough to know the out of bounds is a whole different entity in itself. And I think that you made a good point in terms of with the arm going backwards. Anytime you see that arm post backwards, whether they have one leg or 2 legs and we're going out of bounds, I would say 99% of the time that's going to get scored 2 points as a takedown going out. Certainly, depending on the timing of the match, you could certainly potentially challenge that and say, hey, I don't think she, had a takedown at that particular point. But I would say 99% of the time, this is going to get scored a takedown going out of bounds and has at the international level more times than not in this process. I think you really have to get out, but as soon as you see that arm post back, in that process, then you're probably looking at 2 points. They may not score it right away because if you post your arm and then you go back to your elbow, they're not going to score it 2 and then 2 more. It's only going to be 1, 2 in this scenario, so they're not going to score it particularly quick. But particularly going out of bounds, if it's close to a takedown, it's probably going to be called a takedown if it goes out of bounds. Like that would be my general rule of thumb. When we're looking at these things, remember that scoring points in freestyle and Greco is about meeting criteria. It's not necessarily always about control. And that's, I think, the hard part, because when we see folk style, nothing occurs unless you have control. If you don't have control, there's basically no points that get scored. Whereas in freestyle, if I push you, you fall down to your back, I'm going to get 4 points. I had no control. I don't have control of you, but I met the criteria, which is what we kind of looked at last week for point scoring. So I think that as you look at this, try to sometimes think less about whether it's meeting a certain criteria, or as whether it meets control, or did it meet the criteria for it to be considered a takedown. In this case, again, the out of bounds, it's a more of a gray area, so it doesn't really hold true. So just kind of, if it's close, again, my best way to say it is if it's close to a takedown, it's probably going to get scored a takedown, even if it doesn't quite meet the exact criteria because it's going out of bounds. 2 points, 1 point, or a flea.
I'm going to get this one wrong.
Tried to answer.
No.
2 red, 1 red. Okay, so good. I'm glad nobody put caution blue on red. It's hard to get a caution when I got a leg up in the air driving you. It's hard to be fleeing the mat and if you're still facing inbound. So those of you that scored 2, anybody like to
I see
defend those
red
two
as
red.
I see red as the attacker. Red's in on the shot. Drives blue out. Blue has a step out, but with the continuation, comes back through, scores the points, gets the takedown. So I saw 2 red.
Okay. I love the explanation. I think when you're talking about referees, the one thing I always like, one thing I emphasize to when we're having meetings, I'm like, no matter what you score, you have to be able to give a explanation as to why you scored it. If you give a good explanation, like that's a very valid explanation. And I agree with it. Almost there's one part that happens in this that changes the scoring, in my opinion, and I'll show that in a second. Those of you that scored 1 red, what did you see on the 1 red?
I think for me, it almost seemed like at one point both wrestlers were almost completely out of bounds. At one point, both of Red's feet were out. He turned and then brought them back in. And so for me, that went after blue went out. But for me, it just seemed like once they both go out, they're out at that point. You can't come back in and score.
Correct. That's exactly what, and I would say that's the reason for why this is 1 red instead of, because blue does go out first and red is able to finish his action, but red has now gone out of bounds with 2 feet. And anytime you're out of bounds with 2 feet, you're out of bounds. Like you can't finish it. You got to finish it.
Right.
You know, you can finish out of bounds. You just can't finish it with 2, 3, 4, 5 steps out of bounds. You know, eventually it's too far out of bounds. In this case, you are 100% correct, Car.
I think that's a great example. And Mike brought up what I didn't notice the first time is, and I was agreeing with our ladies here. I scored the 1, and you know I'm at a local freestyle Greco tournament or Fargo, whatever, and everybody's talking about continuation, but I never think about it turning and continuing or back into bounds. It's all, to me, it's too many straight lines in my head, you know.
Some of the times when you go to the table, you have to, I know, like at least in folk style, you have to go to the table and ask it in the form of a question. So,
Yeah,
my
right.
question might have been here would have been, did Red have 1 foot out when he finished, or did Red have 2 feet out when he finished? And now it starts to generate a thought process. You know what? I think Red had 2 feet out, and then that might stimulate that thought process to go back through that.
Uh-oh.
Just took a slight lead here. Took a slight lead.
4
It's
points.
going to be close. This is push out, step out, or flee.
Oh, I got it wrong.
Yeah, I felt like I should have, like I did the wrong thing. No, I got it. Never mind.
No, I got it wrong.
I got it. You're on the podium. I was getting tired of it saying Jessica's beating you by 198.
Dang it.
Those that score caution and a point, what was your reasoning? Because I'm not saying that's certainly a very viable answer in this scenario. Why did you score it caution and point?
I just went back to what you said earlier about if he turns his back, he definitely fleed. So that was my first thought, was did he turn his back? No, he was more defending. And he wasn't pushing. He was running through that shot. I mean, could have changed the direction. But as far as knocking out the fleeing, he was pressuring back in and never turned his back. So that was just the simplest thought in my head, going back to an earlier explanation you gave us.
All right, for the flee.
Yeah,
Okay.
he didn't flee, so that quickly knocked that one out. And then I just is he stepping out because he is resisting, or is, JB pushing him out? And who am I to score against Jordan Burroughs? So I was going with him.
Yeah, I felt
Anybody
the
else?
same way. There was no try to circle, change a direction back into bounds. It was a straight line that he didn't pressure back into him. He didn't look like he was really like sinking or trying to ground himself. He looked like he went with the motion and took the 1, wanted to take the 1.
I think that's I think that's valid. I think honestly, this is probably could go either way, 50-50 on how this will be scored.
Yeah, I do too.
Because he's attacking him going out of bounds, and the hard part is, like, if you have a leg up in the air and somebody's driving you, how much control do you have of where you're going?
Exactly.
And that was my justification for scoring 1 red here. But I certainly think that, you know, in the process, yeah, I don't know that he fought real hard to try to defend this, you know, but if I've got 1 leg up and I'm driving, you know, it's hard unless you just want him to collect and take you down right there. You know, you're trying to stay up and keep your balance. Unfortunately, Zach, because I scored 1 point for red.
Yeah, no, I'm out. Yeah, no, I
That,
get
that
it.
may have dropped you.
I'm
you
still.
know.
I want to throw the block.
Yeah, I was 50-50, and then I was like, it's too easy to be one.
So push out, step out, or flee. Most of you scored a push out. Who wants to tell me why you scored a push out?
I scored a push out because when they get to the edge, even though like red is like putting the pressure on, he's doing what you were talking about earlier. He's stopping the action of trying to get into his ties, and then he just kind of just loads up and palms to the chest. Kind of just straight pushes without being in on any action, underhooks, overhooks, or anything.
His arms look fully extended. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with the 5 of you in this process. Now, I don't think blue was doing a whole lot here. I think blue is definitely being passive and not trying to take holds and et cetera. And this is I think a part where when you're coaching, you know, like here, just continue to attack them and go out of bounds in this process. Don't stop and shove out, because if you stop and shove out, 9 times out of 10, you see a direct straight shove like this where his arm's right here and then just shoves them out. It's going to get called a push out in that process. So, So we got like 1 question left, I think.
One
question left, and I'm not even telling you what to choose. You're going to have to pick. And this is a Greco match. So Zach, this is really on you here, bud. So we'll see here. All right. And it's going away. It's going to be a tougher view here.
Oh, this is terrible.
I totally cheated and knew this answer because I was at this match. So, but I was having trouble lighting up the colors with the numbers. I'm like, what's the right color number combination?
Yep. That's sometimes the tough part. I was nice to you guys, because if you look at the screen right now, like I put 2 red with the red one. I put 2 blue with the blue one. Here I had to put 1 blue with a different color, but I've done these where I didn't even think about it too much, and I just put them in the order. And so I would have the 2 blue with the red one and the 2 red one with the blue one. And every time they're like, I don't know. Like, I thought I scored the right one, because they're trying to do it fast.
I got to tell you, I would have scored it this way no matter what, because I scored it this way when I was sitting at the table doing the commentary on this match. Yeah. So they're like, and I remember somebody yelled at me, that can't be 1 blue. I go, it is, because you have to have a point out of bounds, but red continued his motion of his move. So you have a slip and a 1 out of bounds. That was my explanation. And they were like, I can't believe you were right. I go, I got yelled at for this before, so I knew where I was wrong.
So you are correct. You know, this is a tough one, you know, because it happens so much, because the first thing you look at is who's doing the action.
Right.
Like, who's the attacking wrestler here?
Yeah.
Red's doing all the work.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is red did all the work, but red didn't score. Like, you can't score any points for red. Like, you can't give him a correct hold for 2 points. He didn't put him in danger, so he can't give him a 4. So now the only thing we're looking at is an out of bounds situation, and unfortunately, he went out of bounds first in this process. And so, you know, when you look back at it and you think about it, like, actually, it makes more sense. Because the only way, because like if we go back and look at the point choices, 2 red would have had to have been a correct hold. So he would have had to throw blue, and blue would have had to landed out of bounds and landed on a hip or his chest, and he doesn't. He essentially lands almost on top of red. 2 blue is difficult to score because red did all the work and blue didn't hold him on his back, and red came off his back. So he got that part, and then the no points to risk and slip, it's out of bounds, so that essentially eliminates this process. So those are some of the tough. That's definitely one of the tougher ones, in that scenario. Like he had a slightly advantage on that one since he was there and saw that too.
I agree. I agree.
So
yep.
He took me with that one.
Very good.
I'll call it a tie for first for everyone. I cheated on the last one essentially, so I get it.
Limited number of clips on the internet, and you get that one. It's
so here's the podium, and then I'll finish up. So,
Danny, you got third.
I'll take it.
Again, I'll call tie. I'll call tie for first. I'm down. I get it.
Good job, everybody.
I think the one part as you guys, look at this is this is certainly an area as referees we're trying to get better at because it's very difficult. Like there's a lot of things to consider when we're looking at the out of bounds. Is it good enough for a takedown? Is it worth 2 points, or should it only be 1 point, or were they in parterre? There's a lot of scenarios that can potentially go multiple places. So out of bounds is usually not a bad place to potentially challenge if it's at the right timing to the match. I think, if it's a 1 point for a step out early in a match, probably not the best challenge option. But if it's late in the match, certainly it is. Or if it's a pivotal point scoring, it's certainly, it's one of those things you have to really weigh out challenge. I remember Fine Alexa a couple of years ago, I think Nashawn Garrett was wrestling Joe Colon, and Garrett fires a double, essentially kind of going out of bounds. And then Joe throws him and goes out of bounds. I was referee, and I scored at 1 point for the step out because I thought he stepped out before he started the throw. I thought the throw started after he had stepped out. Whether that's right or wrong or not, as a coach, that's a difficult challenge to make, because if you lose the challenge, and he gets another point. So now it's a 2 point process, but it is big enough that it would have switched that. That's a big point swing, 4 points versus 1 point the other way. And sometimes when you're looking at it, you're like, you know what? I don't know if I agree with it, but the 1 point is not a terrible option, so you just deal with it and move on in that process. You really have to weigh out those options, especially when it's, some of the situations are really close and really tight.
Okay, one more, and I'll be quiet so long because I know everybody else wants to talk. I apologize. So at Greco, I'm in quad pod and I'm on top. Is it supposed to be scored? Because I thought about this question afterwards, but you drive me, I hit an elbow, and then you roll me. Is that going to go 2 and 2 99% of the times?
I would say so. That's what it should be. Because if I drive you down and you go down first and hit an elbow, whatever, you get 2 points for the takedown, then you get 2 points for the turn in that process. So, and that's another area that we look at a lot too, is that quad pod, because if it's direct to danger, it's 4. And if it's hand to hand, like if I rotate you in a quad pod and you go hand to hand, I'm only going to score it as 2 points in that scenario.
So I have a similar question with scoring, whether it's parterre on the feet, and I'm thinking more of like the front headlock situation, and the person in the defensive position feels like they're on the feet, and then they feel like they're getting pushed out of bounds or pressured toward the zone. And I've seen it called both ways, where they drop to their knees and get pushed out, and offense has been awarded a step out. And I've seen it where they drop to their knees and then they're considered parterre, and then they get pushed out and there's no score. What is the timing on that?
Well, I think if you've established that you're in that position before, I don't think there's any problem. That stays in parterre, and you go out, you get shoved out of bounds or whatever from that. But you established you were already there before this started. Where you start seeing that as people will, as they're going to the edge, will drop to their knees and then slide out. Sometimes we had a situation a year or so ago where that would happen more than one time. And after the first time, actually maybe after the second time, like they both called, the referee on the mat called it and said, no, they were parterre, went out of bounds. But then they got warned, like, you can't do that again. Like if you do that again, it's going to be a point, or it's going to be a caution for fleeing the mat. you know, if I was wrestling and I was in a front headlock and I was getting near the edge, I probably drop to my knees too and do my best and control an elbow and try to go out that way. Because if I give up a point, I was probably going to give up a point anyway. So, but if they don't score it as a point, then I feel like I came out ahead.
Hey, everybody. Thanks a lot for joining us with Moments Off the Mat. Thanks to U.S. Wrestling officials, Zach Garrett, Tom Quisley, and thanks to our amazing group of coaches for joining us today. I think I got beat pretty bad. So for all of us at USA Wrestling, keep working hard on your coaching challenge block rules, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.